Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about financial aid and budgeting. We are here with our financial aid director. My name is Toki, and I'm an admissions counselor at AUP. I will be taking your questions, and Randy will be answering them. We will also be joined by a current student, Chiara, in a moment, who will share with you her experience budgeting as a student living in Paris. Your questions are welcome. Please don't hesitate to write any and all questions that you might have in the questions box at any moment, and we will make sure to address them during this webinar. All right, let's begin.
Okay, thank you, Toki. Hello, everyone. As Toki mentioned, my name is Randy Vener. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at the American University of Paris. And I know the university very well. I've worked here for quite a few years, and I've always been responsible for just about all the aspects of financial aid here. So I am originally from the Los Angeles area, but I kind of consider myself very much Parisian after all the years that I've spent here. But I think I have a pretty unique view on the university and the idea of financial aid and how it affects our students. So I'm looking forward to this as well.
Great. So let's begin with, I guess, the most straightforward question, Randy. What are the different forms of financial aid that we offer here at AUP?
The different forms of financial aid. Okay. I think one of the things, I just quickly looked over the attendees, and we're going to be recording this so other students can listen to it at a later time. One of the things that might help is that, or to kind of set the stage here, is that although the American University of Paris is a very international university, we really consider ourselves international in so many different ways, not from the number of nationalities represented on campus to just our outlook and even the experience here on campus. However, we're still the American University of Paris. And actually with financial aid, to understand financial aid, I guess, better, you'd have to kind of look at it from a bit more of an American perspective versus an international one. And so we follow very much in the same path as a lot of American universities. A lot of the same terminology is used. We have a lot of the same ways of evaluating the financial aid awards and the treating files, students who have different ways of cobbling together a lot of different resources. It's very much an American way of doing it. It's not all American, but when I preface that because American universities are very often are expensive. AUP is an expensive university, so finance always plays a role. People are always thinking about it. And one of the things, I guess there could have been two major ways of going, or two different paths. Either everyone pays the same price, and that's just the way that it is, and I suppose it'd be the tuition would be lower, or we do it in a different way. And so we follow, I guess, what a lot of American universities and other international universities do, which is offer some form of financial aid to our students. So that's the preface to the whole thing. The way that we do it is we pretty much divide it into different forms of financial aid. Some are kind of automatic, some are linked to merit only, some are linked to merit and I guess financial need, which is very much an American way of doing it as well. We actually take into account and ask for your financial information. So that's how we do it. Now, to break down the different forms of financial aid at AUP, and again, I've been doing this a long time, so sometimes it makes perfect sense to me. If people have questions for more detail, I can do that. The first and foremost, when someone applies and they go through, they apply for admission, they are considered their entire admissions file, and you're all familiar with that by now. all the different aspects of your file, from the essay to the letters of recommendation to the transcripts, the last 3 years of your transcripts. All of that is a part of your file. And we have a scholarship. So the very first thing before anything else happens is that our admissions committee considers every file and offers or does not offer what we call a global citizen scholarship. So students don't even apply for that. They don't even willingly apply for that. They're either awarded or not, and that's anywhere between, say, $1,500 per semester to $2,500 per semester. So that's a scholarship. And again, sometimes people think of financial aid as scholarships, or kind of the same thing. For us, it's really not. When we talk about scholarships, scholarships are generally linked to something that's outside of academic need, sometimes a special type of student, or following either rewarding some kind of merit, or in the case of something I'll talk about, our IB scholarships for students taking the International Baccalaureate exam. So those are what we call merit-based awards. And to just touch on that other merit scholarship that we offer, the International Baccalaureate, that it doesn't apply to everyone, but we do have a lot of students at AUP who follow the IB curriculum and end up taking the IB diploma at the very end of their studies. So we've been so happy as a university to welcome IB students. They've done so well. It really is a perfect way to prepare a student for university, that not only do we give them advanced credit, in some cases up to a year of advanced credit, we also give them automatic scholarships. And the reason why I guess we initiated it is that we were giving that money out anyway. So we wanted to just kind of get out ahead of that and welcome all IB students. So anyone who gets, there's a breakdown on the website, but students who have a minimum of, say, 32 on the diploma will get 7,000 euros per year, as long as they're full time. So it's a sliding scale that goes up all the way to 20,000 a year for students who get a 40 and above. So those are the merit-based awards. We have one which, again, it doesn't apply to a lot of students, but we're very proud of it and we're very happy about it. It's made a difference, and that's the VA scholarship. So for American students who either qualify for what they call Chapter 33, which is the post 9/11 GI Bill, or another one that's called Chapter 35, the VA Survivors Independence Education and Assistance Program. In any case, students who would qualify for those would already know about it, and we give those students, no questions asked, if they're degree seeking, 5,000 euros a year. It also doesn't preclude them from applying for any other, even need-based financial aid at AUP. So those are the scholarships. Those are kind of automatic. You don't really have to do anything else. It's a kind of automatic consideration. Now, beyond that, what I guess the main, the scholarships and form of financial aid that represents the most money for students is what we call tuition awards. And the tuition awards are, I guess, and I kind of have a tendency to reference, as I said in the beginning, American-based, ways of criteria in evaluating. But there's something for all American students that they have to fill out called this FAFSA. Some of you already are very familiar with it. Some of you have never heard of it. The FAFSA is what all American students have to fill out. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And basically, all that it is, it's kind of like a big software program that takes in all the financial information of a family, and then it spits out this report, and it says, based on all of these different things, we think that it's reasonable. Your family should be able to reasonably contribute this amount per year. And so that's more or less what we use. We use the same kind of methodology. Okay, so we look at this need side. Now, so there are some questions that we ask, and depending on all the students over the years, especially from certain countries, there are just certain questions you don't ask, or most of the time you don't ask in certain cultures even. And that's fine. I mean, the thing is that students don't all have to apply for financial aid, but if they do, they have to follow the rules. And one of the rules is that we have to be able to properly evaluate someone's financial situation or their financial need. So we have a form, we have an application. It asks some confidential, it only stays within the financial aid office, all of the documents. We ask some kind of straightforward questions in order to evaluate a family's need or the family's ability to pay. So that's pretty much how we do it, and it kind of goes along the same time frame or the same path as even the application for the application for admission. So it's first you have to be admitted. We don't look at financial aid applications at all before you're admitted to the university. And then after that, we will properly evaluate a financial aid file. So I would say those are the different major forms of financial aid that are kind of housed within the financial aid office.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Randy. So at this point, if any of you have questions for Randy on the different forms of financial aid that we just mentioned, please don't hesitate to write your questions in the questions box. If not, I will go ahead and ask you the next question, which is outside of financial aid options that you've just mentioned, since we are an American institution, how can American students benefit from federal aid?
Okay, yes. All right. So again, we have over 50% of our students are American. So this the U.S. Department of Education and what is kind of involved in the entire federal loan and federal grant processes are linked to AUP because we follow something. We are what they call Title IV approved, which basically means that we've done everything we need to in order to be able to administer funds from the Department of Education, and all of our students can get access to certain things, not everything, but certain things. What usually happens though is that because of our foreign school, and this is a long, I don't really want to get into this because it's a very long and convoluted story, but we're basically defined, the Department of Education defines us as a foreign school. So if we're a foreign school, there are certain things we can and can't do. Most of the time, it's not too limiting. The main thing that it stops our students, if they get federal loans, from going back to the United States and doing an internship or doing a semester abroad. That's the worst. But we also don't get, since we're not located in the state, we can't get what they call Pell Grants and kind of federal supplemental education opportunity grants and all these different kinds of things. They don't represent a lot of money, but it would help. But we're prevented from doing that. What we can do, and this is somewhat of a dry subject, but it's very important for some students, and that is that they can take advantage of the American direct loan system, which means that they can borrow enough money if they want to borrow the money to fund their education. So they can borrow usually it's a combination of a lot of different things. It's the AUP financial aid and what we give in terms of our scholarships or tuition awards that they've already received. And then the students will complement it maybe with a little bit of their own resources, maybe a little bit of the family's resources. And then there's the federal loans or even private loans. There's one option for private loans that the students can apply for. So that represents, actually, it's getting close to $6 million a year. It's a lot of money. It's a very serious thing to take out a loan, and you need to know what it involves. But it's a very common thing for our American students. And I've gotten to know a lot of American students over the years because of the loans. We have a lot of interaction.
Great. So we do have a question from Jennifer, who is asking, if you are receiving a discount towards AUP, would you remove that discount first before borrowing money, I assume taking out loans?
Right. Okay. So let me try to interpret that, and then if I've messed it up, then I'll be happy to. So I think what the question is saying is that if there's another form, now in this case it's a university that's going to contribute, another university that contributes 30%. Whether it's another university that is going to contribute 30% of tuition, or say an outside company like the World Bank or something, if it's just somewhere else where there's money coming from somewhere else, what you should do in looking at, you need to look at the overall, okay? And the overall is what they call at least in U.S. Federal loan terms, the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is on every university's website. Okay, they have to do it. We have to define that. And what that is the tuition of a university plus any fees that are required, and then reasonable, and that's a key word, reasonable living expenses. So the university defines reasonable living expenses. So if you add all of that up together, that should be even in financial aid award letters. This is how much it costs to attend the university. Well, if you have money from an outside source, you should be subtracting that from what is needed. Now, that's something different. In some cases, like the VA, like I said before, the university, meaning the financial aid office, doesn't even have to take that into account. Students can borrow whatever they want to borrow as long as it's within the cost of attendance. If we know that there's outside money, especially coming from a specific scholarship source, then that means that it's no longer, it's removed in a very good way. It's removed from the budget, so it's not needed anymore, and that's how we would do it. So I think that's what was answered.
Absolutely, and it's important to mention that if we don't answer your questions fully now, please don't hesitate to email us, follow up via email to admissions at aup.edu or directly to your counselor, and we will get back to you with a more detailed answer. So our next question is from Lisa. Lisa is asking whether there is a deadline to submit the financial aid application. Yeah.
Okay. So deadline. So here's basically where the financial aid works. Financial aid works. I kept talking about the timing a little bit earlier. So from early February onward, the financial aid office at AUP starts to award. We start to award for the incoming fall semester. So there are 100 different things that could influence an award. Again, I touched on some of that from the application, from the family's financial need, from home, so many different things. One of the things is, in fact, timing. So I wouldn't necessarily call it the bad news. It's not too late to apply. Students can still apply, but again, we are now, the May 1st confirmation deadline is passed. Which I know that has been moved around slightly for some people, but we have been awarding quite a bit. Now, it doesn't mean that it's too late for the fall. Students can still apply, but it also means that students could, in future semesters, and I can touch on that as well, could apply. Continuing students, if you, let's just say as an example that students come in the fall semester, they haven't applied for financial aid or they didn't need to apply for whatever reason. Continuing students can apply as first-time financial aid recipients with no problem. There's the need side, just as I talked before, they'd have to fill out a financial aid application, but they also need to have a minimum cumulative GPA of 3.0 at AUP. So again, that kind of mirrors, in order to keep the other financial aid awards, you need to have a minimum 3.0 for the Global Citizen Scholarship. You need to have a minimum 2.5 for the tuition award. And then I've just realized that I've skipped over one, just circling back a little bit. There is a very limited amount of AUP Scholar Awards that we could talk about that as well. It's a 75% award that can go up to 75% of tuition. And that is also linked to 3.0. That is a combination of all the aspects of the file, and students are automatically considered for that. So I guess there is no deadline, but it'd be a good idea to finish up what you need and then send it in.
And just as a follow-up to that, in more practical terms, how would that work with our tuition deadline, which is coming up on July 15th? If students are applying for financial aid over the summer, and they also have the tuition deadline, would they need to wait for the financial aid award before paying, or would they need to go ahead and pay tuition?
Okay, yeah, good question. Okay, so the deadlines are the deadlines, so you have to take that into consideration now. Now, July 15th is a ways off. What the financial aid office will not do is, if it's a complete application, and that's the key word, complete, if it's a complete application and everything's all set, we're not going to sit on it for 4 weeks. It's going to be processed, and there's going to be a decision. It could be a positive decision or a negative decision, but whatever it is, you'll know. I don't think it's a good idea to just not make any payment, especially if you're waiting until after July 15th. You should probably be in touch with your admissions counselor. And this is the thing, at AUP, what we've done is that most all the communication is done through the admissions counselor as the single point of contact instead of different offices. So, and I'm talking about AUP and the admissions and financial aid. The AUP Office of Student Accounting Services will be in touch in terms of the billing, and they're pretty much, their task is to collect tuition. So they have deadlines and they have requirements. I would say the worst thing that ever happens is if people kind of go in hiding and we don't hear from anybody. If you're in contact with your counselor, in contact with Student Accounting Services, we'll do our best in order to process everything so you can move forward.
We have a question from Tamari. Can students who did not receive an award reapply for financial aid, or what would the options be for somebody who unfortunately did not receive a scholarship?
Okay, so again, whether or not someone doesn't apply in that first semester, or if they'd applied and then they were not given a financial aid award, that still doesn't prevent them from in future semesters reapplying. So again, it's the same criteria. We're going to be looking at the same two main forms of evaluation, the financial side from the financial aid application, but on the merit side, it's going to be pretty straightforward. It won't be as, I guess, complex as the entire admissions file and all those aspects of the admissions file. We would take into account what the student has been doing since they arrived at AUP, and also what their cumulative GPA is. So it's not, that's a pretty hard and fast rule. If someone has a 2.7 GPA, that's just not going to be possible.
All right. So next question, also from Jennifer. This is a good question for students who are taking out loans, because you do have to indeed keep in mind all of the payments that will be coming through. So housing being one of them.
Right. What
would be the timeline for paying for housing, the deposit, the installments, and paying tuition if you are taking out loans?
Okay, so loans and housing, in a way, very often, the American federal loans and our housing are the company that we work with, Blue Stripe Housing, Blue Stripe Services, sorry. They're very often inextricably linked. Okay, and we have just begun to have frequent contact, and it's going to continue throughout the summer. And basically, what happens is that the loan students are the only students out there who really kind of have an exception in terms of and I'm not talking about a housing exemption altogether, but working with Blue Stripe. What they'll do is, if the AUP Financial Aid Office will vouch for the student, in other words, if the AUP Housing Office will say all the loans are in place and there's not only going to be enough money to cover AUP tuition and fees, but there's going to be enough money coming back in a refund check through these loans to cover all the housing expenses, then that's very simple. What we just do is we'll see that on paper. We communicate that information to Blue Stripe. They mark the student down as okay. And at that point, the student only needs to pay the deposit, which is even half what the other students are paying in terms of the deposit, which is about 936 euros. And then that's it. Then they're marked as okay, their checklist goes green, and they can proceed to the next step. So the question, or the key point, is to make sure that all of those aspects of whatever is required with the loan steps are completed. You know, the promissory, all that boring stuff basically, but important. The promissory notes are complete. The AUP loan plan is filled out and returned to the counselor, and you've kind of worked through all of that. But again, we have documents that kind of have step by step to help everybody.
Okay, very good. So perhaps one last bit for Randy before we switch over to Chiara, our student who's joined us in the meantime. Can students find jobs outside of campus in order to supplement their living expenses when they work, especially non-European citizens?
So can they? Yes. Short answer is yes. And what has been nice, because I had mentioned earlier that I have been at AUP a long time, I remember, which doesn't seem that long ago, AUP didn't used to pay into this national health care system. They call it the Sécurité Sociale, which is basically the health care and the social net here in France. And since we're now part of it, what that means is that our students, because it's a form of higher education, our students are allowed to work part-time, an average of 20 hours a week. In other words, their student visas allow them to do this. Now, sometimes it's a little tricky. Basically, what it comes down to is that it's more or less the average of 20 hours a week over the year. Now, a lot of students don't do that. I'll give you a real common, and Chiara probably knows students who can do this. Sometimes students just want to be students, or be students, say, full time in their first semester or so. But what happens is that they'll build up the ability, because again, it's 20 hours a week on average, and they'll end up staying, say, through the summer, or a good part of the summer, working full time over the summer. Now, the challenge, of course, is that we happen to be in the middle of Paris, France. So a lot of the jobs require a certain amount of mastery of the French language. It's not just for everybody. It would depend on what you do. But so yes, there are jobs, and our Office of Student Development categorizes them and publishes them. And so our students, we see students all the time going off campus trying to going from job to job and getting different experiences at different points. So that's not our internship office, but it's sometimes the line is thin.
There is an option.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. So if you guys have any more questions for Randy, feel free to write them in the questions box, and we will switch over to Chiara now. Chiara, would you mind just quickly introducing yourself and telling us where you're from and what semester you're in at AUP and what you're studying?
So hi, I'm Chiara Amor. I'm from Australia and the Philippines. I am just finishing up my junior year, so I'm going into my senior year, which is super exciting. And I'm currently double majoring in psychology and philosophy.
All right, perfect. So let's start with a general question. How do you budget your expenses as a student in Paris? If there's any advice or tips that you can give to an incoming student on where you would find yourself saving money and where you find yourself, you know, having a little bit of extra money and you feel that you can spend a little more, how would you go about? Do you have any tools for budgeting? Do you use any apps? Yeah, any practical information that you can share with our incoming students.
So I think the first one is when you open your bank account, you're going to have an online banking app, and it's very important that you have all access to that, because that for me is where I check how much money I have, and then from there I kind of divide you know, how much I need for every month. And for me, I always prioritize my rent money, because that's, at least for me, that's where my rent comes out of. So I will always kind of make sure I have whatever my rent amount is off to the side, and that even if I somehow overspend with eating or with my activities, I will never go over my rent money, because that for me is extremely important. So I kind of put that off into savings at all times every month, and then take it back out when it needs to go to my landlord. I also constantly write down my expenses, and I actually keep all my receipts and like my notes. Just to see what I've spent. So if I don't, for example, want to go through typing in my code on my app, I can see exactly how much I've spent, and I always have a total and kind of keep updating it. Of course, it's really difficult to do though, because you don't always want to update every little expense, especially if you just tap your card for €1. But you try, and it's the attempt of knowing and having a general idea. I also do a lot of student discounts, honestly, for a lot of things. So luckily, AUP allows us to have student discounts in a lot of different areas, like a gym membership, for example, is only €200 for an entire year, which is extremely exciting. And so that for me is, essential, and I don't have to spend a lot of money on my gyms, because otherwise it's like really expensive per month. But also in saying that, you have opportunities for like metro passes, because that also comes straight out of my account for banking. But those are all things I don't really have to think about too much. It's more of like when I'm budgeting, I always, allocate how much I want to spend, per day for food. Being in Paris and being a student, you can find places that are extremely expensive, but those are kind of tourist traps. So I find myself eating out in more kind of areas of Paris that tourists won't normally go to, but you find very cool areas that are not expensive. And in addition to that, I don't know if this sounds silly, but eat with friends. Like, I tend to find myself at friends' places, or we have raclettes, in which everyone contributes a little bit of food, so you don't have to spend for an entire meal by yourself. And also with that, cooking for yourself is extremely difficult. Like, cooking for one person at least, I found is hard. Though it's convenient if you're doing meal prep, which is something I also do for the week. But if you're not doing meal prep, it's always easier to kind of find like a group of friends, and maybe like once a week have something where you all bring, like cheese to a raclette, or bread, that's very inexpensive items, and you will find yourself, kind of eating together and spending less. And also AUP events, they always happen on almost a daily basis, and all of them have some kind of food and drink at it. So if you're, for example, studying late at the library, like me sometimes, you'll find yourself at an AUP event nearby, and you can always grab food from there, and there's your dinner. Yeah. And that's really cool. I don't know that's what I'm supposed to do, but I do that.
That's actually something that our students mentioned yesterday in the chat, that they find themselves at many events at AUP that offer food.
Yeah, for sure, because it's convenient.
Great. Okay, so we do have a question from Jennifer, who would like to know how much you spend approximately per day on food and on the metro.
So for the metro, I know it's around, not mistaken, 32 or 35 euros per month as a student, with your Navigo pass, which you can apply for. And you can use that as many times as you want per day for the month, and that will come just straight out of your bank account, which is extremely convenient. However, if you decide to not get a Navigo pass through the university, it'll be 75 euros per month for the exact same thing, or it's approximately 180 euros for a single ticket, a single trip. So the best way for that is definitely apply for a Navigo pass with the university. And as for food, I always try to spend around 5 to 7 euros for lunch, and then around like 10 euros for dinner. But at least I'm always on campus during lunchtime. So at least for me, I would go down to like the Amex, which is a school restaurant cafe that we have on campus. And they serve full meals that can be like 8 euros for like a whole meal, which is like a proper plate. It's not like a little serving, it's a proper big, in my opinion, American size meal with like a drink and dessert, which is really convenient. You can get that for 8 euros. So that's definitely a fun way to budget, especially because you have supermarkets nearby as well on campus that you can go to, and you can buy some of their like pre-made stuff, which is, maybe not the most healthy thing at the end of the day, but it is still very good. So yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned that you get together with your friends quite a lot. Do you cook on a regular basis?
I do actually. Maybe I should do it more, but like I don't know, 2-3 times a week. That's a lot
good,
for me.
yeah.
But I always cook things that I can kind of eat for the next like 2 days. As I said, it's very difficult to cook for one person, so I always cook in larger quantities for things that are really easy to make. So like I do lots of pastas and like chicken dishes. I don't know. I can't think of everything I make right now. But I definitely do things in bulk. Because if you do things in smaller portions, you find yourself wasting one, more food, and two, it's kind of a waste of time to do that every single day, especially being a student. You do a lot already throughout the day, and it's kind of exhausting to come home and cook every single day. But simple things like salads and pastas, like and baking things if you have an oven.
And doing essentially meal prep.
Yeah, meal prep is really important and really easy, and it's not hard to do. So.
Do you have everything you need in your apartment in order to cook, or did you have to buy certain things for the kitchen?
At least for my first year when I was at AUP, I did not have a microwave. So I did have to purchase a microwave for me and my roommate. But minus that, we did have an oven, obviously we have a kitchen, an oven, a fridge, stove. We had everything, and all the pots and pans were there, so we really didn't need to bring anything, which was convenient.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Jennifer, and that's actually that coincides with the question that I was going to ask about traveling. Do you travel a lot, and how much travel do you do, and how much would you spend on travel? And this is actually a good point either of you can address regarding the coup de pouce
and the cultural programs.
And the cultural programs, exactly.
I travel a lot. I travel almost every weekend, fortunately. But students in general, they tend to travel a lot because we're in Paris, so we're based in the center of Europe. It's very easy to go around places for a very inexpensive price. And you can travel in many different ways. You can obviously take the plane, the bus, trains, and the prices vary depending on where you're going, what time of the year, what time you're traveling, and obviously what form of transport you're taking. But I have noticed a little tip that I'm going to give you guys. I don't know if it's going to help, but Tuesdays, if you want to look for really inexpensive flights, Tuesdays are always the day to do it. On Google Flights and Skyscanner on an incognito browser, because then it can't look at your cookies, so it can't try to scam you, which is really convenient. And I always find like the cheapest travel flights through there. So
I didn't know this, but I think someone has mentioned it to me before, and
it's a significant difference. I've seen like hundreds of euros difference between like a Monday and a Tuesday. So that's something
that fits in perfectly with this webinar right now.
Yeah, right.
Thanks.
So what are some examples of destinations you've been to recently?
While
you were at AUP.
While I was at AUP, I mean, I do it all the time. Spain, I was in Valencia a lot. I've been to Manchester, Warsaw, Zurich, Munich, lots of places in the Netherlands and Belgium, lots of places in France. I would tell you everywhere, but it's all such a blur. But yeah.
And how many of these were your personal trips with friends on weekends, or and how many were study trips or cultural programs?
Honestly, I've only actually done one study program, study trip, just because I travel more for my profession rather than through AUP, unfortunately. But the one I went to for AUP was Warsaw, Poland, and it was for a topic studies and genocide class, which was extremely interesting. And it was inexpensive for what we got out of it, which I think is really convenient. And AUP did help with coup de pouce, if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. The coup de pouce, well, first of all, before talking about the coup de pouce, we talked a little bit about what the cultural programs is. It's a cultural programs office that is really one of the most unique and amazing offices here on campus, because, and I know this because I've spoken with so many students over the years after they've graduated, and they sometimes remember these trips as some of their best memories at AUP. And basically what it is these are trips that are linked to a class, and 1/3 or halfway through the semester, or whenever it would be, the students will leave with the professor and visit someplace, usually a lot of times it's around Europe somewhere, but this semester I know students went to New York, they went to Taiwan. So, and you know, you could have something like an art history class, learning all about the Renaissance art, and then halfway through the semester they go to Rome. So anyway, in order to help students do this, because these are additional costs, it's not lumped into the cost of the class itself. And it usually isn't a long time. Sometimes it's between, say, 2, 3, maybe 4 days at the most. What the university has set up, which now has a budget of over 40,000 euros per academic year in order to do this. And we actually work very closely with the Student Government Association, Chiara is a part of as well. And it's a form of scholarship, and students can, if they, for example, if they're going to be going to Berlin or to the Rotterdam Film Festival like they did this year, they can apply for, it's a standard application, not as complicated as our AUP one, but they can apply for a scholarship, and it's a coup de pouce. Coup de pouce is basically, I guess, a loose French or English translation of that is like a helping hand, and or a leg up, I guess, with different references. But basically, what it does is it helps students bridge the gap, and it can be anywhere from, say, 10% or even up to close to 50%, depending on the trip and the timing. So yeah, it absolutely can help students, and the university is actually, that was a great thing that we did. We saw how important it was and how much we wanted to expand the program, and we doubled the budget for that not that long ago with the help of Celeste, our president, who was really behind that.
All right, and so speaking of cultural programs, obviously we're in a cosmopolitan city. Paris has a lot to offer to everybody, not just students. But do you, Chiara, do you find it to be a student-friendly city? Do you feel like you have a lot of, you mentioned a couple of discounts, but where do you feel you get a lot of benefits being a student in Paris? What are some of the examples?
Well, honestly, I really do think the Navigo class is the biggest one for me, just because I commute very often. I commute every single day to university, and then also around like the city. And of course, you can use it as many times as you want throughout the day, which is extremely convenient. So if you want to, and also you can take it to Disneyland, which is really cool. So it's not limited to just the inner circles of Paris. But of course, you have like gym memberships, and then I'm also a part of like a yoga and a boxing and a rock climbing club, which is super cool. And like the discounts can be like, because I'm a student, I only have to pay 60 euros for 10 sessions at a gym, not a gym, sorry, like a rock climbing gym, instead of paying 180 euros for the same 10 sessions if I wasn't a student. I think it's extremely student friendly, and generally almost everywhere I've gone to that involves an activity, they always have a student discount because they always want to promote students come and join them. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll take any last questions that you guys might have. And if not, I will ask a question. What would you recommend if there's anything that you feel when you were packing, you missed out when you were coming to Paris? There are certain things that we mentioned in the webinar yesterday with our current students who said, you know, for example, American imported goods, you know, and certain food products are much more expensive here in Paris. And so when they go home, they stock up on certain food items and they bring them back. For example, Nicole, our student, mentioned popcorn. And and that she always brings some popcorn with her to Paris. But there are, of course, a lot of affordable options here compared to where students might be from. Do you feel like you would recommend some students to bring something with them, or what would you recommend that they leave at home and not worry about because they can find it here in Paris?
Honestly, if you don't have to bring anything, I wouldn't bring anything. I've noticed, well, from coming from Australia, it's a very long trip, and I thought I had to bring my life with me, especially because this is such like a different culture and I can't find Australian things here. However, I've found that it makes more sense to just not bring anything. You end up finding more here than you realize, especially with American goods. There's actually quite a few stores, even around campus, that do sell American, candy and chocolate, etc. So you can actually find a lot of things that you want already in Paris, which is quite convenient. But at the same time, like if there is something that you desperately cannot live without, for sure, bring that with you. But it's not a necessity. And I think honestly, pack light. You find yourself buying more things in Paris, especially because like your style changes and your taste change, and it's just good to kind of keep it minimal. I wish I knew that when I came in, because admissions did tell me bring one suitcase. I did not bring one suitcase, and I ended up not wearing or using half of those clothes because everything changed. So I think just unless you really need something, I don't think there's a reason to bring it over.
Okay, wonderful. So I think we will end our session here. Thank you everyone for coming in and listening to our webinar. If you have any follow-up questions, something that you didn't think of and want to hear from us, just email us at admissions@aup.edu or contact your admissions counselor directly and we'll make sure that we follow up with you. This webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel and we will send out an email with the link to that to the recording very soon. Thank you all for coming.